Okay, quick update. Monopolies. So, imagine you live in a city with 20 soccer teams. A lot of fun, a lot of soccer, a lot of umbros, a lot of running around in cleats, a lot of moms driving around in Suburbans. A lot of economic activity generated, but most importantly, a lot of soccer getting played. Now, say some guy decides he's tired of seeing like crappy kids playing soccer. So, new rules are all changed for playing soccer in this city. Now, after every game, the best players, the ones who scored the most points, blocked the most, made the best passes, you got a panel of judges. They decide who are the best players from each game. They get pulled and they form one team out of the two. So pretty soon you go through your first round of everyone playing each other. It's consolidated down to 10 teams. And then the same thing. Those 10 teams play each other, consolidated down to 5. Pretty soon, magically you get down to 2. So 2 teams, which are the all-star teams. However that works. You've got kick-ass soccer players, and they are super efficient at playing soccer, and they get all the points, and they do all the blocks, and they're super cool, and they've got the best gear, and you've got the TV station there, and everyone's watching these 2 soccer teams. Well, what we don't see is all the potential players who could have emerged if there had stayed 20 soccer teams. And now everyone just watches the 2. And now in order to get into the 2, it's really hard because you basically have to bribe someone's mom and their dad, and you have to be really cool, and you have to be friends with so-and-so, and we're not gonna, it's never gonna be the same. We don't know what we're missing out on because we're just gonna watch those 2 games. And all we see is how awesome those soccer players are. The all-star team. And so this is what a monopoly is like. It used to be that monopoly, the focus was just on the United States. But because of globalization, now monopolies you should look at them internationally because that's how they operate. It's been fueled by the rise of these monopolies have been fueled by a loose central bank policy. This gets a little complicated. But so basically, a loose central bank policy means the Federal Reserve or the Mario Draghi at the European Central Bank or the Bank of Japan or the Chinese Central Bank, they basically, to super simplify it, they print money in a loose policy, or they set a really low interest rate of banks to banks loans so that meaning you don't have to, the cost of loaning money becomes super cheap. So that encourages people to loan money, especially banks to banks. And then when you do things like quantitative easing, it's a complex way of circulating more money among these banks. So basically it's like you're printing money, but you don't have to print it because it's all digital. So the central bank releases the money and it goes out to several banks, and we don't know which those banks are specifically, but those are the main banks. They're pretty much all in New York. And some people would say that, okay, well, the problem is those banks are hoarding the money, that's not quite right. They are distributing the money, but they're mostly loaning it and investing it into a dwindling number of larger and larger companies. It's easier to pick a winner. So it's like buying better and better and better and better equipment as you're dwindling down those fewer soccer teams from 20 to 10 to 4 to 2. The banks are picking those winners, and the way that they know they're going to be winners, it's a sure thing, is that, well, there's a lot of ways, but one is basically an easy way of making profit is to turn a company and a market into a monopolized market. So whenever you hear about a big merger and acquisitions, two big companies merge together, you don't hear, oh, and they're hiring thousands of new employees. You always hear, and they are firing thousands of employees. And you never hear two large companies come together and the new company is losing tons of money. No, the new company is making tons of money. The profits increase. And so when the bank funds such a merger and acquisition through a big loan so that it can, one company can take a loan out from the bank and buy the other company to become down to the two all-star teams, they make a whole lot of money. So that's a very easy way. So what happens is the central bank gives the money to those banks loan the money to a dwindling number of companies that become down to like what has been called recently in a Bloomberg article oligopolistic competition on the international scale. So what's been going on is these companies have gone out internationally to developing markets. That means China, that means Brazil, that means wherever, South Africa, places that formerly were communist, and so they didn't really have a market system, and places where they didn't have much manufacturing. So there's a quick return on investment, because if you take people away from like subsistence farming and silly stuff like working for state companies that are very inefficient, and you put them to work using modern equipment, they can make things and then export them to countries that can afford to buy them, like the United States, for really cheap. So this is also another Bloomberg article. $45 trillion are coming home to roost. So all that money that went out and is invested at the developing economies, like specifically China, are tanking. So those people are taking their money out and bringing it back home to safe havens, which is they're bringing it home to the United States. So people who are real money advocates, that means like they don't consider fiat or paper currency to be real because it's not backed by something that most people would consider to have inherent value, even though it kind of is. People like Peter Schiff, people like all kinds of libertarians, they think that this will cause massive hyperinflation as that 45 trillion comes back to the United States. As because there's so many dollars, no one want to hold the dollars. But the thing is, all the other central banks around the world have followed the Fed's policy because they want to keep jobs. If you held your currency stable and it appreciated against the dollar as the dollar kept being printed and distributed, then you'd have €1 could buy $10. In other words, €1 would be worth $10. So if you're in the United States and you've got $10, you can only buy $1 worth of stuff from Europe. No, you're not going to buy anything made in Europe. It would cost 10 times more. And this is what President Obama called the race to the bottom, and what economists call a currency war. So the other central banks around the world have also been printing money. They've also been playing the same game, printing money distributed out to several large banks like Deutsche Bank and Hong Kong, Shanghai, Bank of China, HSBC, and Royal Bank of Scotland, and so on and so forth. Those are the banks that are the recipients of the money that they print, the pounds and the euro and whatnot. So it's possible that because the monopolies in the finance have succeeded so much, such that there's so few banks with such a large market share holding so many trillions of dollars, even when they come home to rest in the United States, it's not necessarily going to cause hyperinflation, because it goes into what's called a liquidity trap. And that's a topic for another day, but I'll put a link to it. There's an article, there's a research paper that came out of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis that's suggesting that we are in a liquidity trap. And the idea is that, like, why aren't they seeing their inflation target? That's what if you pay any attention to the Federal Reserve Bank, most of what they talk about is an inflation target. And they say they want to target 2% inflation. And it's like, well, we just need to keep printing money, and we don't understand why we're not seeing 2% inflation, but everything's fine, and we can just keep sending the money out until we reach that target, and that's our barometer here. Well, what's happening is the monopolies just decided there's nothing worth investing in because they've already mergered and acquired everything, so they just sit on the cash. So in a sense, they are hoarding the cash, but it's because they don't see anything where it's a sure shot. They don't see anything that they can get a big greasy profit off of. So the demand for holding the cash outweighs their interest or their potential profit making from sending it out, from loaning it. So it actually could be deflationary. Deflationary meaning that the value of the dollar will increase, and it already is. And particularly because it's possible that because the Fed even just has, even just going up to a 0.5% interest rate, that already beats other central banks like Japan and the European Central Bank, which have a negative interest rate. That's crazy. What it means is, I'll do another video about that, actually. We'll get to that next time, but the takeaway here is monopoly is rampant, it's international, and it's like 20 soccer teams going down to 2. There's less total soccer getting played, and a lot of people don't get a chance to shine. A lot of kids, they'll never get to play soccer, they don't get to be contenders. And a lot of things that could have happened just won't happen.